Shalom. Giving all praises to Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shah, by Hashem HaRachakodash. Send double honors to our apostles and elders, her great millstone. Peace and blessings to the Lord's hopefully elect. So, as promised, just a quick follow up to deal with the one clip that I did. The two things he said completely wrong regarding Edomites, Deuteronomy 23:7. You shall not abhor an Edomite. Of course, they teach that all that's talking about white people. You can't hate white people. And then he mentions the law in 1933 to try to precept it, to try to further prove that you basically can't dislike anybody. You know, this is why we said that they sold out. But like I said, I was going to do a, just to address that really quick, is you have to go into the words to understand the scriptures. We've been saying that, okay? The men of IUIC are adamant against that, and they want you to just read things for the face value, which is English, but you won't get understanding of the scriptures of that. And the reason they're doing that is because they have sold out. They have taken the bribe to the powers that be. They have a 501c3, and they have changed their doctrine to basically go back to Christianity. They have said that you can't go into the Hebrew. You don't know the Hebrew. You don't know the names of the Lord. That's the big one. They want to go back to teach that you can only have one wife, and if you're not legally married according to the state, you're committing a sin. Right? They teach that there's a hell doctrine now that's only for Israelites. And then pretty much what's next is they're going to say that all nations can be saved. This is what happens when a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. The dog returneth back to his own vomit. So as he's going to read here in the law, he's going to try to link that to say this is why you really can't, according to them, you just can't dislike anybody, period. Right? You can't dislike anybody. And every man in the scriptures that killed an Edomite or did anything, they were all evil. Basically, they all went off because according to them, oh, you can't hate Edomites. Okay, well, why did King David put garrisons on Edom? Why did he make them tributaries? Why did David slew the Amalekite that slew Saul? I guess he went off then, right? King Saul must have went off, right? Because they slew the Amalekites, but they saved some. But then Samuel came in, he slew that king. So I guess they went off too, right? All these guys, they went off. Nah. All right, that's why you got to go into the words to get understanding. Deuteronomy 23:7 is not talking about an Edomite. That's a lesson I just did. It's talking about a Syrian, not talking about an actual Edomite. And this law, there's certain laws in the scriptures that are mentioning the word stranger, but you got to understand that in the Old Testament, there are 4 different words for the word stranger. It's translated into English as stranger, but in the Hebrew, there's 4 different words. So there's 4 different meanings that you have to understand. And you have to know that, otherwise it's going to be confusion.
Well, understand, none of us should be running around hating white people. No, Leviticus 19:33.
Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 33. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land.
So a stranger sojourn in our land. Okay, the stranger here is talking about another nation. Came to our land and sojourned with us. Read on.
Ye shall not vex him.
We shouldn't what?
Ye shall not vex him.
Read on.
But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you.
Read on.
And thou shalt love him as thyself.
Meaning, when it says to love him as thyself, to do what? It means treat him right.
All right, wrong again. Everything he said is just wrong. What are they even right about? I'm not being funny. They're just wrong on everything. Okay? It don't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. Here it is. We just came out the land of Egypt. The first people to come against us were the Amalekites, the Edomites. We destroyed them through the Lord, and the Lord said, "Write it in a memorial, for I will ultimately put an end out for Amalek." Right? Then after that, when he turned the 3 cursings into 3 blessings from Moab, he said, "Write that down, and they shall not enter into your congregation." So here it is. We just went through writing that down to remember it, but then afterwards he says, "You can't hate nobody." right? Is Israel to the world, the Israelites were just a bunch of big punching bags. They could do all manner of evil against us, but we can't be mad. We can't be upset. We have to treat them like they're our own. That's how you know this doctrine is coming from the devil. Why? Because the devil ultimately, Esau Edom, he seeks to be exonerated from his crimes. So he tries to teach Israelites to teach that you can't hate nobody. You can't, we're just a bunch of big punching bags. No, that's a bunch of BS. So now, this word here in Leviticus 19:33, if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. Okay? But the stranger that dwelleth among you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord Yahweh your God. That's not talking about another nation. So first, let me pull this up. Brothers have shared this. It's a good website. I'll link it below. But it explains how you have 4 different words for the word stranger in the Old Testament because it's written in Hebrew. Right. It says native, strangers, immigrants, and foreigners. He says, in another article, I discussed the different people groups of the New Testament, the Jews, Greeks, nations, and proselytes. In the Old Testament, we have 4 different people groups, the natives, strangers, immigrants, and foreigners. Attempting to differentiate between these different people groups can be very difficult if you are using a translation, as it is not uncommon for a translation to use the same English word for different groups. For instance, the King James Version uses the word stranger for zawar and gar. Okay, it says this is why it's imperative that one uses a Hebrew dictionary such as Strong's when doing a study of biblical words. Exactly, because it explains natives, it explains one who's just an immigrant, right? And it also explains like a one that's actually a other nation. That verse there is not talking about that of another nation. So if we read that right in the New King James, it says, if a stranger dwells you in your land, with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. NLT says, do not take advantage of foreigners who live among your land. So that's important to know because we're going to see if that makes sense when you get later in the law, where the Lord talks about what you can do with actual heathen nations. It would be a contradiction or a confusion if you didn't understand. So bottom line is this word stranger is the word gar. Okay, gar. And this word basically means a traveler, right? One who's not, you're not a native born. Let's say, what's a good example? Okay, let's say you might say, okay, let's take the ancient. Okay, you had the Israelites, right? You're an Israelite, but you live in the land of Egypt. To them, you're a stranger. You're a gar. Okay, you're not an Egyptian. You're an Israelite, but you live in Egypt. And all right, just to show proof of that, the next verse when it says, "But the stranger that dwell among you shall be as one born among you," it's the same word, gar. Now, a good example is to use what Moses said here when he named his son Gershom. Right? Exodus 2:21. And Moses was content to dwell with a man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. So you know what you find out about this verse? Though it said, I have been a stranger in a strange land, he's using 2 different words. This is why it's important. So the name of his son is Gershom, which means foreigner. So that's the word he's using to describe himself, and that's the name that he gave to his son. So he said, listen, he said, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom or Garshom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Let's see what words he used. He said, I have been a stranger, a gar, in a strange land. But wait a minute, this is a different word. This is Nakarya. Nakarya. And this is talking about an actual other nation, a non-Israelite. You see? So the word stranger just means like an immigrant, a traveler. So when the Lord spoke about that in the law, he was referring to a gar, okay? Because we ourselves refer to ourselves as a gar, right? Or as a stranger. Abraham, when he went to bury Sarah, I'm sure it's right here. Yeah, Genesis 23 and 4. This is when Sarah passed, and he spoke to the children of Heth. Genesis 23, and Sarah was 170, 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah, and Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham stood up from before his dead, and he spake to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So he said that I am a guard, right? Because I'm not a native born here. So I don't have any land, I don't have any possession. So can you give me a possession that I can bury my dead? So we ourselves refer to ourselves as strangers. That's the point. We ourselves, Israelites and Abraham, refer to ourselves as a gar, as a stranger. So that proves that when you go to the law, some things, when it says strangers, could be referring to Israelites, and others could be referring to actual other nations. Another a good example. When it comes to the topic of usury, what did the law say? All right. Deuteronomy 23:19. And thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything lent upon usury, which means interest. All right. That's why our law says what to have balanced weights. It says, unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord Yahweh thy power may bless thee in all that thou settest thy hand in the land whither thou shalt go to possess it. So if you read things from the English face value, you just went where it says you shall not mistreat the stranger. Then over here it says you can exact usury upon the stranger, right? Well, that's because this word here for usury, for stranger is nakarya, see? Which, as we read, is referring to another nation, a non-Israelite. As Moses himself said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. He said, I am a gar in a land of Nakar. Two different meanings. That's why the Lord here says you can use him as what? Someone that's not an Israelite. Even when it came to selling unclean meats, as Deuteronomy 14:21, and ye shall not eat anything that dieth of itself. Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is within thy gates, that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it upon an alien. For thou and holy people, the Lord thy power, thou shalt not see the kid in his mother's milk. Right? Deuteronomy 15:3, of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thine brother thine hand shall release. So this is why you got to go into the meanings. You see, sell it to him. Okay. So you couldn't. This is how we. This is the difference. So you gotta go, and this is a good read, but you gotta go into it to understand the difference, right? One is another good example, Isaiah 14, right? It says, and the Lord Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. So this is what a scripture that a lot of people like to use to say, see, it's talking about the strangers, but guess what? That word there is gar. Gar. So Israelites, as well as the Israelite foreigners, because it's all referring to those people. It didn't say Nakarya, which is referring to actual other nations, right? And yeah, I did a Wait a second. I did a class over it earlier in the year, and I had I went further into it. But yeah, you got 4 words. You got gar, which means an immigrant. Azarach, so like a inborn tribe member. You got Zawar, which means another tribe, and then you got Nakaria, which means a non-Israelite. So I went deeper in it, on that one. But yeah, this is how you find the breakdown of the understanding. You got to go into the words. Okay, so everything that he said in that clip was actually incorrect, and I'll link it down below. And with that, shalom.